Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the 2023 Green Swan Conference, dedicated to the development of new technologies to reduce carbon emissions. I am Bertie Delavaux. I work for the Banque de France as head of the Climate Change Center and for the NGFS Secretariat, which is hosted by the Banque de France. It is my great pleasure to lead this session, gathering a panel of experts from the academia and from the private and public sectors. Our distinguished speakers will help us understand the practical challenges we face in the development of new technologies, which are key to achieve the transition to net zero. Indeed, our community of central bankers and supervisors makes an increasing use of climate scenarios to get a forward-looking view of climate-related financial risks. These scenarios are being developed notably by the NGFS in a partnership with an academic consortium. And in this exercise, we make a number of hypotheses on the availability and the use of new technologies to achieve a net zero trajectory by 2050. There is a number of promising new options for slowing the accumulation of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. For example, new forms of nuclear energy, carbon capture and storage, carbon sequestration in agriculture, and ecosystem restorations. Yet it is unclear whether these frontier technologies or techniques will become viable options in the real economy soon enough to make a difference. So this session of the Greenspan Conference will look at this mitigation frontier and try to assess the conditions under which these technologies or techniques could become deployable at a meaningful scale so as to better understand their true potential in a timely manner. So we gathered today a panel of experts to give their insights on the questions. Let me introduce to you Mercedes Maroto-Valer, Director of the UK Industrial Decarbonization Research and Innovation Center, José Miguel Benavente, who is the Vice President of the Chilean Corporación de Fomento de la Producción, Renaud Crassou, Executive President of NUWARD, and Paul Hughes, who is an energy analyst at the International Energy Agency. The panel will be divided into two phases. In the first phase, I will ask each of our panelists to present the most significant technologies based on practical examples. In the second phase, we will discuss the prospects for development of these technologies, possible bottlenecks, and the conditions required for them to take off, particularly in financial terms. To our invited attendees participating via WebEx, you will have several opportunities to ask questions to our speakers. After each speaker's case study presentation, we can take a couple of short clarification questions. And at the end of the panel discussions, we will open up for another round of Q&A. So if you want to ask a question to our speakers, please type it in the chat. I will select the questions to pose. On this first round of case studies, we will start with you, Paul. So to introduce you a bit further, so you work as an energy analyst in the International Energy Agencies, in the team dedicated to the World Energy Outlook. Your main area of work is industrial material production impact on the energy system and the environment. You also focus on technologies, innovation, and policy framework enabling the transition of the energy industry. So can you explain to us the challenges involved in decarbonizing certain sectors that are vital to economic developments, such as cement and steel? Up to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Bertie. Good day, everyone. So first, thank you very much for the opportunity to present at the Green Swan 2023 conference. So in this 10-minute case study, I will focus on two hard-to-abate industries, which have received quite some attention in the last couple of years, steel and cement production. So just to give you two highlight numbers, today's production of steel is just below 2 billion tons, and cement is more than 4 billion tons. So you can, given the sheer size of those numbers, you can imagine that they are two pillars of our modern way of life, and will continue in the decades to come. Next slide, please. So what are the reasons why we call steel and cement production as hard-to-abate sectors? First, they rely on very energy-intensive processes, as they require very high temperature levels. Iron melting point is more than 1500 degrees Celsius, and temperature in a kiln must be more than 1400 degrees Celsius to produce clinker, the key ingredient of cement. For steel, almost 90% of this thermal requirement, as well as reactants, is met by coal today. And for cement, the share is 60%. So very emittive fuel. Second, steelworks and kilns are long-lived assets with an average lifetime of 40 to 50 years, with some plants running for more than a century today. Renewal of the fleet takes time, and retrofitting those plants is technically and economically challenging. Third, the chemical reaction of those processes release important quantities of CO2 emissions, though the emissions would occur in any case, regardless low emissions fuel that are used to meet the high level required. Therefore, there are heavy contributors to the energy sector CO2 emissions. Taking into account the emissions associated to the electricity and commercial heat, 17% of total CO2 emissions from the energy sector are for steel and cement production today, as you can see on the pie chart on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. In contrast with power, where many technologies such as solar PV and wind are mature and very cost-effective already, to bring down emissions, the keyword is innovation. Many low emissions alternatives to coal-based steel or cement production technologies are still not yet market ready and require significant additional support to scale up. As mentioned, those alternatives not only need to focus on replacing fossil fuels, but also tackling the CO2 emission of the processes. The pie chart shows on the left-hand side, shows the change between 2021 and 2050 by source of emission for heavy industries. So heavy industries also include chemicals on top of steel and cement in our definition. And this is in the scenario that is reaching net zero emissions by 2050 of the total energy sector. It is a scenario that we usually call NZD, or NZD by 2050, and that is compatible with the Paris Agreement. Over half of the reduction of the emissions comes from coal, a third from process emissions, as well as non-renewable waste reduction, and the remainder of the savings come from gas and oil. And as you can see on the pie on the right-hand side, almost 60% of those emission reductions achieved in the NZD by 2050 scenario is achieved through technology that are at prototype or at demonstration phase. These technologies can be split into two groups: carbon management and carbon avoidance. The group of carbon management technologies include the different carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies, such as pre-combustion, post-combustion, oxy-combustion technologies with different solvents. The carbon avoidance technologies are replacing fossil fuels by other fuels or reactants in the case of steel production, and also include the technology that replace emittive materials, such as clinker production, with alternative materials. Let's take steel production, which accounts for the largest share of coal emissions in the industry sector today. By 2050, we would need a quarter of global steel production to be equipped with CCUS and another quarter to rely on low emissions hydrogen. That means building or retrofitting 25 average size steel plants per year from 2030 to 2050. So that's quite a massive challenge. And our analysis shows that advanced economies need to take the lead in supporting demonstration and diffusion of these new technologies, and some are actually doing so. But ultimately, most of the deployment needs to be in emerging and developing economies. Next slide, please. And to better understand the feasibility and timeframe of such a radical change, we conducted an analysis about the lock-in emissions at the looking at plant by plant at the plant level. After around 25 years of operation, plants often undergo a major refurbishment to extend their viability. And on this graph, I plotted the heavy industry CO2 emissions in the announced pledge scenario and in the net zero emission by 2050 scenario, so the line in green. And the dark purple area shows the emissions if plants continue to be used as of today until their next investment cycle, so life start age plus 25 years. And the light purple area shows the additional lock-in emissions if plants continue to be used as they are used today until the end of their lifetime. And you can see on the graph that to be in line with NZE, we would need the industry stakeholders to retrofit or to revamp their assets at the next investment cycle and not wait until and just replace the existing asset because basically the green line is within the light purple area. So to be in line with NZE, the challenge is to ensure that innovative near-zero emission industrial technologies that are the large prototype and demonstration stage today reach markets within the next decade. And that's very important because by 2030, around 60% of steel plants and 50% of cement plants will have reached 25 years of age, and so they will face these investment decisions. So if these innovative technologies are not ready to be deployed rapidly at commercial scale within the next decade, the existing assets in question will continue to produce emissions at around their current level until the end of their working life, and they will at some stage become stranded assets. Conversely, if they are ready, and if existing plants are retrofitted with them or replaced by them at the 25-year investment decision point, this could reduce the projected cumulative emissions to 2050 by more than 55%. So the critical window of opportunity from now to 2030 should not be missed. I'm done with this case study. So back to you, Bertie.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for this very interesting case study, and also maybe a call to action to act very quickly to have these technologies up and running for the next investment cycle. So we can turn now to our second panelist, Mercedes Maroto-Veller. Mercedes, to introduce you a bit more into detail, you are champion and director of the UK Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, IDRIC, focused on accelerating the transition to net zero of the UK industrial clusters and establishing the first world net zero industrial cluster. You are deputy principal for global sustainability and director of the Research Centre for Carbon Solutions at Heriot-Watt University. You have worked, among others, on energy systems, CCUs, integration of hydrogen technologies, and low carbon fuels. Mercedes, so can you explain the technologies linked to carbon capture, use, and storage, and how they could help achieve the transition? I'll leave you the floor, Mercedes.
We will not be lost.
Maybe we lost Mercedes. Okay, we lost Mercedes. So maybe we can move forward to the next case studies, and then Mercedes will present hers when she can connect again. The next case studies were the one of Renaud Crassou, who is executive president of New World, EDF's group subsidiary dedicated to SMR, so small modular reactors. Before that, you have been working within EDF Group, where you held different key positions, but you started your career as a researcher also in the field of economics, particularly looking at energy scenarios and policies to fight climate change. Can you tell us more about the small modular reactors you are developing and the impact they could have to abate carbon emissions?
Yes, thank you, Bertil. Hi, everybody. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to speak about this large topic of small modular reactors as a whole new set of solutions that will complement existing ones for deep decarbonization of the world economy. Obviously, all these solutions belong to the nuclear family that is already considered by international organizations and many countries as one of the important levers to deliver a safe, stable, low carbon and dispatchable electricity. But for a few years, new developments, massive new developments in all directions have been realized and are likely to intensify in the following years, so that we come with new solutions with a broad range of various nuclear technologies, and they will be ready for commercial and industrial deployment for some of them at the end of this decade and beyond that for the others. This comes out also with an increasing interest from a large panel of economic actors, not only from the classical big utilities that are familiar with nuclear operation, but more and more from energy-intensive industries, municipalities, financial actors, and this is also a very interesting move. So let's begin with what's happening on the technology side. And please, would you come to the slide number 3, so that I can show you this map of from an IAEA booklet that gives the most comprehensive view of the situation, including more than 70 concepts and projects around the world. Don't worry, I won't describe all of them. I'm not able to do that, but just give you a few hints to understand what's happening. If you go to the next slide, please, you will see the first criterion to understand the move is about the technology which is at stake. What is wonderful in all this movement is that these large efforts for new developments are targeting all kinds of technology about nuclear fission. On the blue side, you see the well-known technologies we usually tag as Gen 3 technology in the nuclear landscape. They are very close to the existing fleet, the same family as the big gigawatt plants that recently came to operation throughout the world. And it includes pressurized water and boiling water reactors. The timeline for those is a race for 2030 to have the first of a kind of these technologies. They are compact technologies, but they have not the same level of innovation in it. So some of them will come probably just before 2030 and some just after. In other colors, you see the different types of so-called Gen 4 technology. They are mainly fast neutron reactors. They can burn the existing used fuel of the Gen 3 reactors. So it's very interesting in terms of fuel consumption and how you close the cycle of fuel, uranium, plutonium, etc. But these technologies have more technological challenges, and even large R&D efforts have to be done, while some demonstrators do exist in some part of the world. For example, the Chinese begin the operation of a gas-cooled heat temperature reactor last year. It was an important fact in the world. The timeline of this project, of these technologies, even if the demonstrators can come fast because there are big amounts of money that are invested in these technologies and a lot of startups and all kinds of actors pushing it very, very fast. We think that the objective of having commercially and industrially mature projects that can be sold to clients will occur later, especially beyond 2035 or later, because a lot of things, but also because they have to set and build a full fuel cycle industry that has to be built and that has to be licensed by the safety authority to be sure that we can industrially operate them. The second criterion is on the following slide, please, is the size of the reactor we are talking about. We usually distinguish 3 classes by size. The first one is what we call micro-reactors. Micro-reactors just deliver a few megawatts of energy, either electricity or heat, and they have specific clients, I would say, especially military usage, and remote municipalities, for example, in Canada or in Alaska, but probably elsewhere in the world. The middle categories, middle-size SMRs with dozens of SMRs of output, or dozens of megawatts, sorry, of output. And these are especially targeted to industrial uses. And the upper category is would say the classical utility or power-based SMRs delivering hundreds of megawatts. And usually these kind of SMRs are targeting a connection to the interconnected grid. And this is the same size as a big dam or a gas combined cycle plant, for example. So when you have these two criteria, you can understand many things when we speak about SMR, what kind of SMR, what kind of technology, and what kind of size. On the following slides, you see also that an interesting move in the nuclear landscape is the fact that you have a larger and larger panel of actors that are interested in the nuclear technologies that are developed. Can you go to the following slides, please? You see that obviously a significant part of these actors are traditional utilities and nuclear operators that are already a nuclear operator, and they want to complement the big plants they have. The big plants usually are usually operated as a backbone of the electric sector, especially in France, obviously, but not only. And SMR can complement these big plants on specific sites, on specific usages. But you have also this new breed of clients that are considering entering into the market, energy-intensive industrial clients, and especially in Europe, for the two energy crisis years we have behind us, more and more industrial clients are being considered if nuclear could be a stable source of energy for them. We have also new usages for nuclear, especially hydrogen production. I guess that we will discuss that later in the roundtable, but also probably desalination or district heating. And finally, we also have a lot of financial actors that are looking for new projects, risky projects or industrial projects to be financed. And as they are looking for decarbonizing options, they are very interested by the nuclear. Let me finish this kind of landscape description of the situation with the next slide by telling you what are the expectations that we see are clearly expressed toward nuclear and especially toward SMRs. The first one is safety. The small size of SMRs can bring a new path for safety. And some of the options that are possible for small reactors are very interesting, especially we can manage safety by design. It is a specific technical word, to say that by design we can prevent some kind of accidents, some kind on initiating events that can lead to an accident. We have also passive safety, which means that without any human intervention, the plant can be in a safe state during several or many days without any external intervention. And we also have an expectation of reducing the emergency zone around the plant so that we can put this kind of plants in situations closer from cities or from industrial sites. The second expectation is obviously competitiveness, because we have to connect these means of production in the network, and we have to fight against coal. We have to gain to be better than coal plants, even with a middle price of CO2. And you see some figures as about the cost of investment. There are also expectations about the financial risks that investors could take into investing in new plants, in new SMR plants. They like the reduced initial investments when you invest something like $1 billion and not $10 billion at once. And especially if you build many units, you can have a cash curve which is largely improved compared to the situation where you have only one big gigawatt plant to build. And finally, we have a strong expectation of multi-uses. That does mean that we do this kind of SMRs not only to produce electricity, but also to produce heat at various levels of temperature, depending on the technology used. I can briefly tell you what are the characteristics of New World as an example of what we developed to answer to these expectations. This is the following slide, please. But I will not have time to describe all of this, but we have a very top level requirements that are very close to the client's expressions. We have an advisory board with some potential clients and experts, and we regularly submit the design to these clients to be sure that we are market oriented and we develop a technology which is highly expected. For example, we develop a modular approach to build these kind of plants very fast as probably a gas combined cycle turbine plant. And our goal is, like some of our competitors, to develop the model to 2030 with the first concrete plant in 2030. Let me finish with, for opening the future discussion, with the condition for success of all this fabulous technology move. SMR will not be only a technology story and a massive effort of technology development. Some conditions for success are still to be met on the institutional and economic sides, and we have to move together with state regulations, international cooperation, and safety regulations. Obviously, at first, when we develop R&D, it's relevant to have an initial public support, which is well sized to support the R&D public externality. And this is the case with massive subsidies. For example, in the United States, we have also strong public support in France. It's also the case in several countries. The second criteria is a level playing field for low CO2 technologies. And while it is completely relevant for all the economists, we are still far from that situation with the current regulation. The third criteria is to develop international cooperation on licensing. Probably you have heard about safety harmonization within the global safety organization, but this is a highly strategic and top-level work. But we have to go deeper into the design issues and to the differences between national regulations and national, I would say, habits of safety agencies that are really different depending on the country. And we do that with New World, with a joint early review with 3 safety agencies in Europe, and we try to foster that effort. The fourth one is how we can give to developers and to industrial supply chain behind us a foresight on project series, because the really economic rationale of SMRs is an economy of series, not an economy of scale. And so we need a series in front of us to be able to engage all the supply chain in competitiveness efforts. And finally, but not least, we need a global, long-standing implication of policymakers and all also regional actors to be sure that we set a collaborative roadmaps. I mean, Canada, for example, is a very wonderful example of how they built and set a roadmap for the use of SMRs in their country. And then after that, regulatory changes, identification of sites, local debate, public debate, etc. That takes time. So that is still a huge work to make it happen, but well, the news on the technology sides are very encouraging, and there will be obviously a lot of things happening with all these billions of dollars that are invested in the new technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renaud. It was very clear, and I think we have no questions in the chat to clarify either of the presentation. So we can move forward and have the presentation from Mercedes, who managed to join us again. So Up to you, Mercedes.
Thank you very much, and apologies, I'm not too sure what happened there, but anyway, I'm back now here. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and the opportunity to share a few minutes, some thoughts on a specific technology and capture, utilization, and storage, or CCUS for short. And I'm the director and the champion of the UK Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, also known as IDREC for short. There is a number of technologies or solutions that we work in IDREC, but today I'm going to be focusing on CCUS. So next slide, please. So looking in terms of, I was asked to give a little bit of an introduction of what CCUS is, because actually CCUS is not just one technology, it's a series of technologies, and within that there are sub-technologies as well, and it's all coupled together. It's all this chain of technologies that is brought together and is what we know as CCUS. There is there, as you can see, this is from the International Energy Agency. Really what we have to do is to understand, if you focus on the right-hand side of the screen, what we have is the CO2 is produced generally with a mixture of other gases, or is present in the atmosphere with other gases. And then we need first to separate it, to isolate it, to concentrate it, and that's the capture part of the chain. And then once we capture it and we have in very high concentrations, then we need to transport it maybe to a place where it will be used, whether that will be for chemicals, it could be for aviation fuels as well. And if there is no a clear use application, in other cases what we do is we store it permanently in a safe geological storage. So that's really what the whole CCUS is. It's a change of technologies coming together to provide solutions. And it may sound like it's a complex because it's all these different wheels in motion that they need to move and come together. What we shouldn't lose sight is that CCUS is critical for reaching net zero. It doesn't matter really what scenario you look at, whether it is IEA or these other agencies, whether it's a national or regional roadmaps, and you're really going to struggle to find one of those that doesn't bring CCUS to the mix. And the reason for that, there are many reasons, but to highlight a number of those in there, is because CCUS allow us to actually transition our existing assets, in some cases from the power sector. It's also really critical to decarbonize energy-intensive sectors, and we already heard about that before, but also equally critical for the production of low-carbon hydrogen. And so if you are looking to produce blue hydrogen, then actually you are going to need to deploy CCUS, or the capture part as well. And then you probably also heard about the negative emission technologies, so NETs, or carbon dioxide removal, CDRs or GGRs, greenhouse removals, depending on which part of the world you are. Direct air capture, it comes under that. And again, what you need is a capture process, it's a capture system. And those capture parts, capture systems, are in some cases very similar with the capture technologies we are developing for stationary sources. So hopefully that gives you a picture of what CCUS is, but also how critical it is going forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, with CCUS technologies, and we heard this already, we need to make the case for these technologies. These technologies, in some cases, they are relatively new. In other cases, it's because we are putting all these pieces of the puzzle in a different place with a different application. And in some cases, also, what it comes down to is because we need to scale up these technologies. We need to deploy them at much larger scale. And this is where these business models come into place. You have examples of two business models. The one on the left-hand side, these are actually UK, and there have been, those graphs are from the CCSA Association. And what you can see in there is that very basic terms, what that industrial carbon capture is telling us is a business model that is based on a contract for difference. And we are very familiar with contract for difference when it comes to renewable electricity generation. So it's a very, very similar model. Now, going back to what I said in the previous slide, is not only about capture, it's also about the transport and storage. So we need to make sure that we have business models that will actually take throughout all that supply chain. And it is in terms of how you're going to be looking at the scalability of some of these business models, understanding that there is a number of different players and operators that they need to come together. Now, this is not just enough to understand it in the context of the UK. If we move to the next slide, really, this is happening on a global scale. We are talking about global markets. Yes, these solutions are deployed in a particular country or a region or a facility, but ultimately all these are technologies that are looking for opportunities and capturing the benefits of the energy transition on a global market. And how different countries or different regions are positioning themselves varies. We know about the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. We know also about the Green Deal, the industrial plan for the European Union. And more recent as well, we have in the case of the UK, the Powering Up Britain, with a significant allocations of money. They all operate with slightly different models. They all build on the strengths of that particular country and the opportunities. But I think what we need to consider from an investment position is that these technologies will be delivered and deployed at scale in global markets. We move to the next slide, please. Now, what is happening, I think maybe everything that I said so far sounds very, very positive and encouraging. What is happening, though, is that we are not deploying them at the pace that we need. So we know what technologies we can deploy now, but we are not doing that. There are some business models, there is some finance mechanisms, but still this is not happening. So we need to identify what are the opportunities that we can start accelerating deployment. And one clear opportunity comes through what we call industrial clusters, industrial hubs. So, and there is a number of those, that's actually a summary worldwide. There are many, many others that are not in that picture. But really the point I want to bring here is that with this CCUS and equally actually around hydrogen and a number of other low carbon technologies, they are being deployed in clusters, they're being deployed in hubs. The reason for that is because scaling up is easier in here. There is already significant infrastructure, there are skills already that can be transferred to these low carbon technologies. And also quite importantly is because where they're geographically located in very, very strategic areas. So we need to consider about how really we can unlock low carbon technologies by building up on industrial hubs. Next slide. And this, in fact, has been or is the case for the UK. The UK was the first country publishing an industrial decarbonization strategy back in 2021, March 2021. And as part of that strategy, acknowledged that the stepping stones for industrial decarbonization are going to happen in the clusters. We call them clusters in the UK, as I said, it could be called hydrogen hubs in the US, in America. That's the map of the UK, and this is actually the Industrial Decarbonization Challenge program. Is funded through the UK government and then through the UK Research and Innovation. And within that, there is a number of technologies onshore and offshore that are being developed and delivered in a number of clusters across all of the UK. And within that program, the Industrial Decarbonization Challenge program, we have IDRIC, the Industrial Decarbonization Research and Innovation Center. And I'm just going to give you a couple of final slides on the role of innovation to make these technologies be deployed and delivered at pace and scale. So if I go to the next slide, please. So the first thing that we need to consider is that this is an opportunity to unlock solutions. And that slide there shows you the key elements of IDRIC as research and innovation. We have a key element around how we deploy solutions. And I'm going to pick on something that has already been mentioned by my fellow panelists. And this is about technologies alone are not going to make it. We need to have whole system solutions. We need to have yes, the technology, but that technology needs to be within a business model that I already described briefly. It also needs to be with a policy and regulatory framework. And all these plans, all these projects will have to be permitted. And so equally, we need to make sure that permitting and planning is coming at pace as well. So that's really what that slide illustrates, that research and innovation, together with the policy engagement and the skills needed for this transition to happen. And together with this is an element of knowledge exchange as what we are doing today. And ultimately, all these things together are really going to bring us pace and scale. Moving on, please. Thank you. I'm not going to have time to cover all the activities that we do in IDRIC, and CCUS is one of the programs that we cover. So I do encourage you to visit our website. If you click, please. We have examples of projects that we are running, and if you press click, please. Thank you. And also there is a knowledge hub as well that you can visit and actually will give you more information on the outputs coming from this project. I'm moving to the last slide now. And I think it's really what we need to do in a number of the technologies, and from what I've heard as well in the previous two presentations, we need to move from ambition to deployment at a much bigger pace and scale. And there are two tools that also have been mentioned before that are key for this to happen. One of them is innovation. And we already heard that we don't have all the technologies that we need. That doesn't mean that they don't exist at all. It means that they're not mature enough to be deployed. I think we need to make sure we reflect on that. But equally is the role of international collaboration, like what we are doing today in terms of exchanging ideas and knowledge. Because if we do not do that, we're actually going to be delayed significantly meeting our targets. So I think that's all I wanted to present. If we just go to the last slide, that's also my 10 minutes as well. So I just want you to leave you with that message. But I think to wrap up everything that I said, CCUS technologies are part of a portfolio of technologies that we need to deploy and deliver. And what we are trying to do is critical. It is challenging, but it's also possible. So please kind of remember those two words: critical, challenging, and possible. And within that, I think it comes the role of innovation and international collaboration as key. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. We have one question in the chat box. I don't know if you have an answer to that, but I think it's an interesting one, referring to the chart in slide 5 regarding industrial hubs, opportunities for scaling up. The question is, Africa seems to be missing in action on this chart. What opportunities exist for the region? How can it get involved?
Thank you. So yes, I think there is the issue of the opportunity with the hubs is that they are actually building on areas where this infrastructure already exists. So there is co-location of petrochemicals with cement, with refineries, and then through that co-locations you get advantage and opportunities of building retrofitted infrastructure. It is true that I think within that map there is no cluster or hub within Africa, and I don't know whether that's actually the case. I need to say, because that map doesn't reflect all the hubs or all the clusters. There is a much larger number of clusters, for instance, in the UK, that do not come in that map. I don't think clusters are going to be the solution for everything either. I think we need to be clear. I think the clusters or the hub concept builds on infrastructure that is in place and how you can actually fast transition that. And then from there, what is important as well is that there's going to be a number of lessons that we're going to be able to take to what we call dispersed sites. Sites that are outside of clusters, but by building up these technologies, they're risking them and lowering costs, then we'll be able to take technologies to dispersed sites.
Thank you, Mercedes.
Thanks.
I think we have no other question on the presentation. So we can move to José Miguel for your presentation. To introduce so our last panelist, José Miguel, you are the Vice President of Corporación de Fomento de Producción, CORFO. This is a state agency of Chile, responsible for developing and helping to create national industry. This agency also contributes to the development of other economic activities such as minerals, agriculture, trade and services. So, José Miguel, can you illustrate the challenges encountered with Chile-specific example experiences, in particular regarding green hydrogen?
Hello, Bertin. How are you? Thanks very much for the invitation. As you already mentioned, my view will be a more broad view about, what we are doing in Chile, especially related with the sector, which is very interesting not only for Chile but also for the world in terms of the decarbonization process, and it's related with green hydrogen. And I will stress, my presentation in certain technology challenges that we have, not only in Chile but also worldwide. And I think this will be very relevant for this kind of industry in the different steps to become, feasible for the world in general terms in the near future. Okay, so if we move to the next slides, this has already been said. Just everyone knows what's going on in terms of how we're facing the climate crisis and the role that energy plays on this. So if we focus on the energy side related with how to become decarbonized by 2050, if you focus especially in the energy side, the 3/4 of the story is there. And also the use of this energy in terms of, as this chart on the right hand side says, is not only commercial and residential, but also already been said, by Paul, a few others, transportation, chemicals, cement, and petrochemicals, another sector which are very relevant, as well as iron and steel. This is how just to motivate that this is very, very interesting part for us. Next slide, please. Here I'm going to concentrate a little bit on the whole industry and the challenges in terms of technology, in few of them, just to make sure that everyone understands what is a green hydrogen. Not my colleagues are here in the panel, but probably people on the audience. And the first one, which I think is very important, is related with how this is produced. Why is it different between either kind of hydrogen? And the main difference with the green hydrogen is because it's green. The way it's produced is related with either solar or wind power based, energy production. And this is the whole difference compared to other ones. Is the gray hydrogen, which is based on gas, which is fuel, fossil fuel based, and few others will be, the colors becoming darker, the worse in terms of, CO2 production. Okay, so one of the challenges now is how you produce hydrogen is related with this electrolysis process. Okay, is the way you separate, the molecule in the water into hydrogen and oxygen. And this is the first, technology challenge. There are some technologies already being placed, which are doing this quite good, but still there's a challenge in terms, first, how to do this more in efficient way, and the second, how you can do it in a less costly way. This is one of the sources, especially if you understand this and the more a cost benefit approach. This is one of the sources where all the new challenges in technology production is set. This is one thing which I want to stress, in the further discussion about, technologies related to how to do this electrolysis process more efficient. And then the other one is I'm moving further to the right, the storage, which already spoken a little bit about the storage, and there are, the uses of this green hydrogen in different sectors, and this is also very, very relevant. The first one is how you use the green hydrogen into what we call power to gas. And there are two issues here, which is very relevant. You can combine hydrogen with standard gas, and you can use locally, at the home level, but still there's a technology challenge, in the combinations of green hydrogen with the standard, gas that you put, on the grid, and then this goes directly to the homes. And this is also relevant not only because of technological issues, but also how this, in a certain way, incorporated in the regulatory in each countries about the proportion of hydrogen can be blended, inside, the current pipelines. This is one thing. The other thing which is very interesting is for us is the production of this kind of gas, of what we call e-fuels. And this is also a very technical challenge because what we call power to liquids. This has been done in a separate process, electrolysis on one side and then transporting, through using hydrogen or a few others like ammonia or other kind of mechanisms to transport this energy. and then to create using your standard, synthesis using the Fischer-Tropsch reactions of water, power to liquids. And this is to produce what we call synthetic fuels or e-fuels. This is very interesting because the first plant that produced all together in the world have been now being built in Chile, in the Patagonia area, which have all the different aspects of this process all together in one site. And this is very relevant because the challenge now is to combine all this technology together, meaning the wind production in this case, together the electrolyzers, together with the chemical production, and ended up, producing e-fuels. And the first plant of this has already been built in Chile, and the first production of the first liters of these fuels have been already produced, like 5 months ago in southern part of Chile. This is very interesting, and this is another very technical challenge. To produce this kind of fuels, you need to take CO2 from the air, okay? And the technology to take the CO2 from the air still is on development basis to make this process very efficient. This is the second very interesting challenge in terms of technology, how to do this in a more efficient and cost efficient way, okay? For example, the technology that this plant is using in Chile is taking literally CO2 from a brewery, which is 500 kilometers away from the plant to use the CO2. And because the technology is not already all developed, you know how to do it in place, all in situ. Okay. Why this is very interesting, because at the end of the day, this e-fuel is carbon neutral, because you're taking CO2 when you're producing the e-fuels, but you're dissipating the CO2 while using the car. For the cars for itself, they don't notice this is the standard or this new e-fuels that we're using. So this is so at the end of the day, you become neutral in terms of CO2. The third one, which is very interesting as a challenge, is the way you synthesize, H2 to produce ammonia, and then the ammonia using to power what we call power to chemicals in terms of, fertilizers. And this is very interesting as well, because you have several challenges in terms of how to produce this in a more cost-efficient way. So this is the third source of technology challenges that is coming in these days, in different parts of the world, how to produce this in a more efficient way. So this is at least this is a broad way about the H2 production, green hydrogen, but where are the areas where now the technology is becoming more and more relevant for, and I'm moving to the next slide, please, to become what the challenge in terms of costs. Because as already been said in other areas and technology, still green hydrogen is is more costly to produce compared to alternatives like gray hydrogen, who's coming from natural gas. As you can see from this chart, in average, you have time on the horizontal way, and then you have on average, around $2 per kilo of hydrogen. But the way that this will come in terms of cost in the future will depend on this technology that we already spoke in terms of the electrolyzers, the way that this is produced in terms of, e-fuels and a few others. And this is roughly some studies we have done to Chile, and how we, in a certain way, to accelerate this process to decrease the marginal cost of production that will become available and feasible in terms for everyone's. And it's very interesting what Paul and a few others have already said. If, for example, the United States, starting with the IRA, is mainly subsidizing like $3 per kilo nowadays, and you can see, the effect which will happen using this chart in terms of how this became available, and feasible in the short run. So, for example, in the case of Chile, a natural advantage is in the cost of production of energy because of the solar and the wind on the southern part of the country, which and the case of Chile could be very interesting in terms to become a very competitive in the world market. But still, it's a challenge as the world in itself, how to move forward, move very fast in this cost of production of green hydrogen. And finally, the next slide, please. This is also gives you an idea about the size of the challenge in terms of market that we're facing using these green hydrogen technologies. The current consumption is around 70 million tons. but the expected production is in between, depends on the policies and depends on things already been said, between 187 and 1,370 millions of tons in 2050. So this is the kind of the size of the market that potentially could be in the coming, 20, 30 years. And for that, you need a lot of generation of electricity using these green sources. And this is very relevant. Just to give you an idea, together Chile produce 18 gigawatts of energy. And to be part of the strategy of Chile develop of the green hydrogen, this means to increase the production for another 30 gigawatts of energy. That's more than double the production of energy that Chile already has. Chile have enormous advantages because of the solar in the north based on electrovoltaic, and then the winds on the south, and which makes it very interesting. But this is a challenge in terms of the size of production. Just to give you an idea in terms of also the technology challenges is, for example, you need to put more than 5,000 towers, the windmills, wind towers in the south part of the country, and how you mobilize, this kind of infrastructure, and this capital throughout, the world, literally, where because the production of, blades and production of this kind of technologies and equipment, are not literally close to where these places are needed in terms of the building up. And the other thing which is very interesting is, despite the fact that Chile, for example, can produce 30 gigawatts, the electrical generation, demand, depending on the scenarios that you have in the future, you will need between 190 and 475 gigawatts, according, to McKinsey, who's done some of these studies for us. So this is a very big challenge, and the challenge is not related with the size of the market, because it's already set there. Is related with a few technologies that we need to go further to decrease the cost, because still are too high compared to alternatives. But as I already said in the previous chart, if this technology move forward in terms of scale, in terms of knowledge, and this is also a challenge in terms of sharing these best practices in among the countries who are now in the frontier, this descending marginal cost at the end of the day will end up being profitable, this sector. This is roughly in 10 minutes what I want to say about this big challenge about green hydrogen in general. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, José Miguel. We have one question in the chat relating to the question of costs and evolution of costs. So I read it to you. We have seen solar and other renewable technology costs come down quite dramatically and a lot faster than expected. Is there scope for that with green hydrogen? Is it just a matter of time, or are there other interventions apart from tax breaks that could accelerate this process?
Very interesting question. There are countries that, first, the reduction of cost will be firstly based on the technology side. This is related mainly to the electrolyzers, the size of them, in terms, because you have economies of scale. The electrolyzers now are not that big, that's supposed to be for the challenge in terms of size. So probably you will have, capex, reductions in terms of electrolyzers. This is clear. The second one is countries are using different mechanisms to accelerate this in terms of, for example, United States on this, okay? And this could be very interesting. We, Chile, for example, we are not that large in terms of, the way to support this kind of, IRA mechanism, to support this. So we're doing, mainly we are basing our, our competitive advantage on, because of the wind, of what we call, the amount of the sun that we got in the north, and the amount of stable wind that we have in the south will give you an advantage in terms of cost. So this part of the reduction will be heavily related to the way that you use the energy itself. And the third one will be related with how you can transport this kind of through ammonia or other ways, this energy to the final markets. This is very interesting in terms of production. This is roughly the expectation that we have, but this is the three sources of cost reduction that we see in the incoming years.
Thank you very much, José Miguel. Very clear. Now it's time to come to the second phase of our panel with some questions to dig a bit further into the possibilities for the future development of these technologies and the possible bottlenecks. So my first questions to our panelists would be what you think about the expected time horizon to scale up the different technologies that were mentioned until now. In your views, what technological boundaries persist? What are the bottlenecks for success? And maybe we can start with Paul on this question, and the other panelists can complement. And maybe Renaud, you can give a more specific view on SMRs.
Sure. To start, thank you very much, Bertie. So as Mercedes has shown on her on one of her slide, while the emission reductions by 2030 mostly rely on technologies on the market that are already available today, if we look at 2050, almost half of the emission reductions would come from technologies that are under deployment. So in our view at the IEA, we see that CCUS technologies and hydrogen-based technologies, as José Miguel mentioned, not only the hydrogen production, but also the hydrogen to chemicals, hydrogen-based fuels, those technologies really take off after 2030. And same for industrial heat pumps, which allows for relatively high temperature, so between 100 and 200 degrees Celsius to decarbonize some of the industry. Then next wave of technologies that would, in our view, come more in the 2040 decade are electricity-intensive processes such as electric kilns or electric steam crackers, and those technologies would only make sense if the power system is fully decarbonized at that time, and that's what we assume in advanced economies in our net zero emissions by 2050 scenario. If we look more closely at hard-to-abate sectors in industry, we see two phases. The deployment of first industrial scale plants by 2030, and so basically showing their industrial feasibility, and then a rapid and massive rollout in all regions, especially in developing economies such as Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Because those will be the production places of the 2040 to 2050 decade. That's where the growth, we are seeing the higher level of growth. In terms of technological boundaries, as Mercedes rightly mentioned, there is a need for an ecosystem to develop, as well as a structuration of the supply chain. For instance, the low emissions ammonia production, thanks to hydrogen or methanol production, as well as hydrogen-based steel production, can only be achievable if the electrolyzer cost reduces significantly. There is also an important challenge on the transport of CO2. As Mercedes mentioned, we also think that the CCUS and the CO2 emissions, the CO2 capture and storage will happen in industrial clusters because of the cost of CO2 transport. Another element, of course, is the upscaling of critical minerals as well as metals supply chain. Not only cobalt, nickel, or lithium, which are used for battery electric vehicles, for instance, but also copper, because the massive decarbonization of the power system would require very big investments in grids, and those are the backbone of the low emission electricity generation. And also some technologies some other technologies would need further research, such as mentioned, electric kilns or electric steam crackers, which are really at lab scale level, or cement production with alternative to clinker, basically. So we also think that there are still some technology breakthrough, such as, for instance, solid-state batteries that could fasten the transition.
Thank you, Paul. Maybe, I don't know, Mercedes or Jose Miguel, do you want to complement what Paul just said? Mercedes? We cannot hear you.
Perfect, thank you. So I think Paul gave really good answer and really comprehensive. So I'm not sure I have a lot to add to what Paul said, and some of my graphs actually were also referenced from IEA work. So I really agree with everything that Paul said. I think if I can reinforce maybe a point is about how important is to build supply chains around these technologies. I think ultimately how countries and business models and positioning going forward is actually going to be depending on supply chains that are built within the region or within the country, and that will really attract significant opportunities for inward investment. So I think that's maybe a point, and as soon as you start talking about supply chains, then obviously skills is another key element on that. So maybe if I could add to that, but everything that Paul said, I fully agree, and I think it's in terms of understanding what technologies could go, we have available now, and maybe so yeah, maybe put up a point here. We tend to talk about 2050 because that's the target for net zero. I think the target is much closer than that, a lot closer. The real target is 2030. Because if you look at really any scenario, if by 2030 we have not really been able to cut down about 50 to 45% of the global emissions, I'm afraid that we have a very slim chance of making this happen. So I think we really need to think about 2020 as this decade of really action, a decade of transformation. And although we don't have all the answers, and again, I completely agree with Paul, and that was one of my last slides, we do have a number of answers that we can start deploying now. We can start taking down risks, costs, building our knowledge on certain technologies that are, let's say, completely new, but something that we don't have as experience as other technologies we have been running in the past. So we need to keep a parallel, or a twin approach here. Let's start deploying the things that we know as of today we can start deploying to some scale and pace. And in parallel, we need to start also deploying and reaffirming new technologies. Again, going back to what Paul was saying about differences between now and 2030, 2040 going forward. So I think that's maybe for me a point to reflect that the target is not 2050. The target really to make this happen and investment opportunities is going to happen in this decade.
Thank you, Mercedes. Jose Miguel, maybe there is also another question you can complement that on hydrogen, and maybe with a particular question we received in the chat about the travel industry. So Boeing said that sustainable aviation fuel will not really help the air travel industry. Can green hydrogen be a realistic solution?
Yeah, I mean, I will take this afterwards. I want to start from the previous question on the chat, which I think I missed a little bit, and also is related with your question about the time horizon. I want to stress that the scale effect is very, very important in terms of how to reduce, the marginal cost of production. This is very relevant. And you can do it on the supply side, I would say, that, the way that, for example, the United States is doing using the IRA and a few other things, which is very relevant. But you can do it on the demand side as well, as already been said. One of the challenges that Chile is facing, and probably we're working, for example, mining sector, which is very relevant in Chile, on agro industry, and it's very intense in terms of, the need of energy. It's a transition to green, for example, green energies to them. And the way where we're doing is using, green taxes. And green taxes in a certain way also gives, the idea that if they are a little bit, more forced in terms of the relative prices to move to green energies, in a certain way, the demand will appear more clearly, especially on the local area, for example, in these big sectors. So if you have this demand effect as well coming from what is going on the green taxes issues, this also gives, the signals that the scale could be a very interesting issue for at least in using the Chilean case. So we will expect that if it is happening, as the chart already said, if you put, like a green taxes on the demand side, this also may increase, the speed. Concerning your question, the time horizon of this will happen. Anyway, the time horizon about, in terms of these technologies and the production will be available, it takes time, which I think as another dimension which is very relevant to consider. It's all what is called the social, and all regulatory permits that some countries has to implement, this kind of investments. And this is not very short, because some of the, regulatory institutions, especially in less level countries like Chile, is because this technology is so new, that the regulatory is not included, how to deal with this kind of project, which are completely different than the standard projects, especially those related with green hydrogen, and which is happening now in Chile. So the time horizon is also related with how the regulatory issues and the regulatory office and the rules in general are set up, to adapt these new technologies, and products, in the sense that sometimes this could be, as part of your second question, boundaries, related, well, the speed of this can be adapted, and implemented in certain countries. So this is another dimension could be interesting, especially from the public policy point of view. Related with the air travel and in general, it's true that green hydrogen is becoming a very interesting solution for this kind of solution, alternatives. This is related especially with the weight, which this technology has in relative terms, which is very important, especially for air transportation, and also the concentration of energy that is captured. It's not hydrogen. It's depending on the technology, using fuel cells, a few other ones, using ammonia or other kind of, we think there will be a transition, in terms of using e-fuels, starting with e-fuels. So it's literally using the standard fuels, but the way you produce the fuels is carbon neutral. This is interesting. And then you will move to a new technology that using, direct cell fuels, a few other ones, not only including the air, but also, marine transportation, a few others. And this is how we see it from here.
Thank you, José Miguel. And then maybe the floor is yours, Renaud.
Yes, thank you, Bertie. Well, the bottleneck or the achievement of a new era for SMR or advanced modular reactor as really a chicken and egg story, like it happened also in many sectors, because the sectors need a clear view of what could occur in terms of demand, and to have a pipe of projects to reach competitiveness and to materialize the rationale for these economies of service. But to do that, the clients and the industry players need some proof that the concept is ready, and that the first of a kind plant is built and operated in a safe manner. So the very conditions that I didn't mention earlier, besides the technological challenges, the fuel cycle stories, etc., is about initiating the pump, having a first site, having a first project, finding some partners to initiate the first project and to prove the technologies are ready. Can be licensed in many countries, in several countries together. And this is achievable through international cooperation. And international cooperation will be really key. All the SMR developers from Gen 3 to further Gen 4 technologies have understood that, and are trying to find ways to set such cooperation between countries, to be able to, to provoke the beginning of the story, and to be sure that we can go into this path of decreasing the costs, proving the technologies, and going to the market with a standardized product. So this will be a really interesting decade in front of us to prove that we can do that, as probably renewables or other techniques have done that in the past, and has hydrogen, CCUS, and other very important techniques for decarbonizing the economy will have to do in the future.
Thank you, Renaud. I don't think we have other questions from the audience. So we could move to another round of question on another aspect. Maybe I mentioned climate scenarios in my introduction to the panel. And indeed, climate scenarios have hypotheses regarding frontier technologies. Different 1.5 degree scenarios by the IPCC notably rely heavily on the rapid scaling up of these new technologies, especially CCS. And so this is also linked to the question we just discussed, but do you think these scenarios are plausible? And Mercedes, maybe would you like to share your views about this?
Yes, thank you, Bertil. I think, yes, you're right. It builds on some of the discussion that we already had. And I think if I can bring back some of the points that I said before, I think is the technologies that we are discussing today, they are critical in terms of realizing those different scenarios, pathways to the 1.5 degrees C. I think a number of those technologies have already been demonstrated. So it's really about how we bring pace and scale in terms of deployment, and we need to do that quite soon. There is also an interesting point that we haven't discussed yet, and we have all of us, I think, touched one way or another about the need to actually support and provide some funding for some of these technologies as they get more mature and they get more into the market. I think it's also understanding that to really fully achieve our targets for prevent the worst effects of climate emergency, we need to go from funding to finance, and that's a significant transition in terms of projects at the scale. And I think it's fine that we focus now on funding and getting them off the door, a number of them. I think we need to be looking in terms of that medium to longer and what it means to move from funding to finance. There's also maybe just one point I want to make around the 1.5 degrees C. And I think it will be important to convey the message that this 1.5 degrees C doesn't mean that it's an answer to all our problems and challenges here. 1.5 degree in essence means that we stand a good chance, I think it's about a bit more than 2/3, to avert the worst effects of climate change. So I think we need to make sure that we understand that 1.5 doesn't mean that we are not going to see anything, and there is going to be any space that we are going to need to also develop technologies around adaptation. And then the reason why I bring this up, although we are focusing more on the technology side of the removal, is because a lot of these technologies at the end is important that we also drive behavioral changes. And we talk about CCUS, and some of the projects that we sponsor through IDRIC, they're actually looking at the social license to operate, SLOs. And I think that's going to be applicable around a number of technologies. This is not going to happen in isolation. And this is going to be linked with behavioral changes, how we can drive and support those. And it's going to be a social acceptance of every one of the technologies that we discussed today. So it goes back to one of the points I tried to make. We need to have these whole systems models and these whole systems thinking, understanding that for technologies to make it to market, we need to have business regulatory framework and we need to have social acceptability.
Thank you, Mercedes. And maybe, Renaud, you can complement on your views on the availability of SMRs, especially to produce, maybe hydrogen, green hydrogen too, to reach these net zero pathways.
Yes, well, I've read some of the IPCC reports since 25 years, so there is always the same message, and it's also the case in the World Energy Outlook that the IEA is publishing each year. It is clear that we will need a lot of decarbonized electricity, a huge lot of electricity. So, and we globally have a big issue of how we ramp up any technologies that can be useful to produce a decarbonized economy. Well, in the earlier 2000 years, we were opposing technologies and having some debate about what is better between renewables, different kinds of renewables, nuclear or elsewhere, or everything else. In the following decade, we were trying to find a compromise, saying that the energy mix will be a mix of those technologies with some dispatchable technology with intermittent technologies together. And I think this new decade is the one where we realize that we are late for everything. And we have difficulties to deploy fast enough renewables, solar, offshore wind, onshore wind, hydro, nuclear. Everything takes a lot of time, notwithstanding the grid developments that it's also needed. So I think now we realize that largely, and so this is really important that SMR come and complement all the existing technologies together with all the possible options that we have in mind. Otherwise, obviously, we will lack electricity to produce hydrogen. We will lack electricity to fuel homes and to produce anything else, because all these downstream technologies will need electricity at the beginning. So there will be some conditions. My chicken and egg story I told you before, and these institutional conditions. But I'm quite optimistic because there is so a huge expectation towards these new technologies, a huge social also expectations that we tackle climate change. So I believe both technology developers and policymakers, decision makers will do a lot in the following decades to gather the conditions that will allow these technologies to come.
Thank you. Maybe Jose Miguel, if you want to add anything on that question.
Yeah, I mean, the way we see it as well is the following. One thing is related to what's going worldwide. Okay, and so we already said, about and the relevance of the energy and the sources, green sources to produce this energy. The other way you can see this is how each country is facing the challenge to become to decarbonize by 2050, and each country's story is different, and we don't know if everyone separately will add up, ended up, reaching what we are expecting. But let me tell you what's going in Chile, which may help, the ideas that we have in mind. We already signed, the agreement that we have to, be decarbonized by 2050. We know that 50% of the challenge is related with the capture of CO2, and heavily related with what's going on the forestry area, which is very interesting. We are massive producing of pulp and paper, which mainly dissipates CO2. So we have a very interesting challenging in how to redefine the way our, production matrix is built today, either to, for example, move to the wooden-based construction, which still captures the CO2, or in a certain way change the way that pulp is produced, capturing, the CO2 is emitted, or can be this a source of CO2 that can be included on the plants that are doing e-fuels, for example, you see? So 50% of the challenge decarbonization in Chile is related with the forestry, which is very interesting. I expect it's different in different countries. The other part, 30%, is related with, already said, energy, and the green hydrogen is the answer to that. So what I'm saying is, and the challenges related in terms of technological is not only related with what's going on the energy, but for example, how we build, new buildings in a very seismic country like Chile, wooden-based ones. Okay, and this is also a very interesting challenge in terms of technology. And there are some people working in all the countries and in Chile as well in doing this. So this is opening up, the technology challenges more beyond energy itself, which are heavily concentrated or actually focused in terms of becoming, at least in the country like Chile, to become carbon neutral. And this is also what I'm saying is, not only we have to see the big picture in how we do our effort related with energy, targeting, this decrease in the emission of CO2, yes, more focus on the energy, but also we have to consider what countries by themselves are doing in terms of becoming themselves carbon neutral, and the technology challenges that emerge on this challenge are different considering each country.
Yes, this is very clear. And I think we can also dig further with the other question. And I wanted to ask all of you, and starting with you, Jose Miguel, about the impact on resources of these strategies to move to cleaner energies. The development of these technologies has to be reconciled with other environmental objectives, such as biodiversity. And how do you see the reconciliation of these objectives, and how you intend to do that?
That's very interesting. I mean, as you may know, Chile is the largest producer of copper in the world, the largest producer of lithium in the world, or second largest. And now we're moving to become one of the very competitive producers of green hydrogen. We have a lot of experience on the natural resources exploration, very bad experience, I would say. And now we are, learning from this in terms of copper and lithium these days. And this is including, all the changes, as I already said, in the regulatory issues related with, environmental, concerns. I will take the lithium case, for example, and also it's a technological challenge. The way we produce lithium, as you may know, is literally we take, the lithium from the salars, and then we put it and we expect, and we dry, literally using sun and wind, and we take, 2 million liters of water taken from the salars, the salt lakes. And it's very, very inefficient in terms of, environmentally. So this is a challenge to include, new technologies in terms, for example, what we call direct extraction and then reinjection to the solar lakes, taking this lithium out and then refill, the salars. And this is very interesting. This is a very, technology which is now developing all worldwide. So the second issue is related with considerations and stuff of people, the civil society, which is they are now more aware, at least in less developed countries like Chile, about these impacts in social and environmental issues. And it's very interesting that some people are at different dimensions of their concerns. Some people are very concerned about, for example, in the case of wind power production, the migration of birds, which is fine. And this is also a technology challenge in terms how if we put some, this very large, wind powers, how to deal with the migration of birds, which is very complicated. And you have now very heavily based electronic radar based, solutions to do this. This is one thing. But another issue which probably in our cases are very relevant is the effect that in the lifestyle of people may have that for example, you will start building up these massive plants of production of energy, say solar-based or wind-based, in the daily dynamic of these people. Meaning, if the population of these cities will increase by twofolds in the coming 5 or 10 years, you can imagine the problem that we have in terms of stocks, the problems of transit, the quality of life in general, prices of housing, prices of tickets, plane tickets, etc., etc. And people are very concerned when you speak to them locally about the impact that these projects may have. So this is another dimension. So sometimes in our countries have not been considered previously, and now the way you have to think about this project is a more broader way, comprehensive way, that you have to consider organized civil society, the way they see these projects, not only because they're going to be affected in the good way, probably the price of the energy that we'll receive will decrease, the supply of the opportunities in terms of jobs and salaries will increase, which is clear. And also the environmental dimensions that we already said in terms of birds and other things, and the use of water, for example. But it's very interesting the way that people, if you go to Punta Arenas on the Magallanes areas, it's one of the widest and prettiest places in the world, and people, they will not want to be affected the quality of life. They move there because of that. And this is an issue that have to take it from the start. We're dealing with the projects. And this is very interesting thing about the time horizon. The time horizon of the projects, not only the technologies that have to consider all these ways that you have to, in a certain way, to inform in a transparent form, in a transparent way, to local people about, the cost and benefits that this large and massive energy producing projects may have to them. And this will take time as well. You need special capabilities to do this. You need institutions that in our countries are not there yet. And this is a challenge that is now we are facing to build up, this new sector based, in this case, in green hydrogen and subproducts.
This is very clear. And maybe Renaud, you can complement on the SMR side. For the SMRs, the question is not really the consumption of space or destruction of landscapes, but they raise the question of nuclear waste. So some countries are exiting nuclear energy. How could the problem of nuclear waste be addressed?
Yes, you're right. First on the fact that the SMR, the nuclear industry as a whole is very low consuming for space and for materials. Reporting when we report the kilowatt hour, the number of energy produced to that consumption of resources. But obviously, the issue of waste is one, and waste management is one of the major expectations of our citizens, and it is a responsibility for operators and governments. Well, first, for the Gen 3 reactors, the way we follow very carefully and we store and we keep in specific places, either temporary or long-living storage, the different kinds of waste is well known and in most of the country well fixed by the regulatory context. But what is very interesting is that if we develop faster the Gen 4 technologies, all the existing fuel, the burn fuel of the Gen 3 reactors can become a new fuel for the Gen 4 reactors. And we can use all the natural uranium resource and the thorium resource for this kind of new reactors. So this is a wonderful story in terms of durability and sustainability of the nuclear industry. This is things that we all have in mind for this century, but there has been some debate in different countries, or if it's needed now, or if it's needed in a few decades, or if it's needed at the end of the century. France, for example, had always a clear policy about closing the cycle with the Gen 4 reactors, but a lot of debates about the timescale. And some countries had less emphasis of this question of closing the cycle and the sustainability of the global nuclear industry. So now with the Gen 4 global movement and global developments, there is an increasing concern about that, and I would say a hope that we can bring clear solutions to even reduce more and more the ultimate waste, and having some proportions that it is very easy to keep it in a few number of places that offer the right condition to store ultimate waste for decades, for centuries or more. And this is a very few amount of waste at the end that we have to store and to control for that. So with this story of SMR and AMR, this is not a story of small reactors, but it drives a lot of technology development, and especially of the Gen 4 technology development. It brings together a solution for the ultimate waste that is very good hope for us.
Thank you, Renaud. On top of these questions of environmental objective, okay, maybe we can turn back to the question of the required financial resources to scale up these technologies. I think, Mercedes, you mentioned that a bit quickly in your presentation, one of the answers to the questions, the need to move from funding to financing. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about the obstacles you see on the financial side of the scale up of these technologies? What is the most crucial need? What are the barriers we have to remove to help these technologies move forward?
Thank you, Bertil. Yes, I mean, if I can add something to what I said before, I think probably would be a reflection around how important policies that give us predictability and stability of what is happening are for companies to decide to make significant investments and be able to ensure that there will be a return of the investment over a medium to a long term. So I think that the way to maybe unlock some of this finance and moving from that funding to financing that you said as well, it may actually not be in creating more business models, but creating a policy framework where companies can make decisions on basis of the existing models that we have. I think in the case of the CCUS and many other areas, it's been models around contracts for difference. I think that those are interesting models, but then also we have things that are changing on a global scale, like we have carbon border adjustment mechanisms that are coming in. And at that point, what it means, how you're going to be regulating a market that is global with carbon tariffs or border tariffs that are going to happen as you try to move low carbon products between different countries. So I think again is I think maybe the key to unlock large deployment is actually maybe not as much on the finance that I think we have enough to get on that. It's probably on that predictability and stability of policy and regulatory frameworks. On the very, very short term, what we are seeing is actually planning and permitting. That is, it needs to happen, absolutely, because we want to avoid maybe unintended consequences or other environmental challenges that we may create. So there is definitely a need for planning and permitting. But I think equally we need to make sure that we are planning and permitting process at speed because we are going to need to pick up pace. Thank you.
And maybe Renaud or Jose Miguel, you want to give maybe a specific view on the projects and financing issues you may have encountered? I choose
Jose.
Jose Miguel.
Okay. Now, just to tell you what we're doing in Chile related with this, which is very I don't know, it's one solution as we already discussed. The first one, I'm absolutely agree what Mercedes was saying. That this is part of the context that should be there, and the rule of the game, uncertainty, the permission and permits, etc. And this is the second one is as already said. I mean, if you compare green hydrogen compared to the other kinds of production of hydrogen or other fuels, we're still very high compared to the other ones. So you have to do, despite the fact you want to move forward in terms of the cost of marginal cost, in the ascending way, and the faster the better. It's still the project have to, in a certain way, I don't know the word in English, is to close the financial, to be to in a certain way to make them feasible. In the case of Chile, we're moving, as already said, in a different way compared to give this massive, kind of subsidies from the supply side. We are moving in two directions. The first one is because the domestic demand will be very high, coming from the standard, very large, like mining sectors, and would this give incentives, for some plants to produce, energy towards them. So the green taxes, for example, will be an interesting tool. In Chile today, we have like a carbon tax of $5 per kilo, which is per ton, sorry, which is very, very low compared to standard. But now we're moving in a pathway which is not linear. It's not like an exponential way, So you give like 3 or 4 or 5 years, giving the signal that it will increase, but increase will be very, very sharp, in the further years, reaching $50, per ton, probably in say 10 years, which is roughly what we have in mind. So this is giving signals. And the other ones it is very interesting for us is we already have certain tax exemptions in terms of, very isolated areas in Chile, especially on the north and the south, for other reasons, and this has been historically. When it happens to be that the north is where the sun is, and the south is where the wind is. So firms actually have some tax intensive to place their firms and productions inside located in these areas because of this exemptions, because they are very isolated areas. Not it's because of the energy production. Every single firm can have this be independent of the sector, and this goes back to Paul and Renaud was saying. The proximity of certain sectors like steel, cement, close to where the energy is produced, which is not the case in these times, but we think in the future will be the case. And the third issue is related with which is more related with the technological issues, is we have a place, R&D tax exemptions as well, research and development and innovation. And this is the other mechanism that we, in a certain way, to try to push, firms that if we want to establish in Chile, foreign or local firms to develop, new technologies related with hydrogen in the production, or different stages of production. This also may help, to them. They have these tax exemptions, which are very interesting, at least in Chile. And these have several externalities, in the creation of knowledge, linkages with the local universities, creation, and give signals to the development and supply of technical people, which in our countries is a very complicated issue, and now we want to increase that side, and also in a certain way to create, production chains related with the production of energy and hydrogen. So we using this kind of mechanism. We don't have the size of the United States to implement the size of IRA or something like that. And we will be we have to deal with other, you can imagine, issues, social and health and education, etc. But this is the way where we're facing, and I think where the incentives are there. And now we have the pipeline of investments in green hydrogen in Chile is very, very big. It's unbelievably big. It's like $55 billion in investment incoming in next 5 years, which for Chilean standards is quite big. So I think, and this is the mechanism that some of these projects under the financial way, they're closing up. Sorry for the very long answer.
No, but it was very instructive and gives much clarity on what is at stake here. Maybe Renaud, you can complement from your point of view.
Yes, thank you, Bertie. Well, something is striking is that in all global reports about energy transition, you always see that financing and is an issue and is likely to be a bottleneck on some sectors, and we have some examples in this discussion. So, surprisingly, in the SMR landscape, this bottleneck is very rarely mentioned, and there is a lot of money to push the technology developments, either private and public money, or both of them. And all these startups that begin to develop new concepts that make an attempt to develop them more rapidly have few difficulties to find some private money to develop and to accelerate. The issue will probably be different if we have some trouble to reach competitiveness fast at the end of the decade. And there will be a very classical valley of death for these technologies before the R&D effort and the initial effort to develop the concept and the first units to be developed that will be subsidized because they are not competitive at the beginning. So we will have to take care at this moment around 20 and 30, I believe. And this will be the precise moment where the public support and the visibility we have to set for this industry will be needed. And I'm very surprised, I'm very struck by the fact that there's a lot of money coming from the oil and gas industry, especially the oil and gas funds that look for different projects, low decarbonized projects, to enter into their portfolio. And the nuclear industry is interesting for them, and they look for opportunities to finance this kind of project. So probably I still believe that the main factors to be sure that we do a success in that field is having a carbon tax, which is the same for everybody, having a level playing field for all technologies that can be low carbon. I'm sorry, because it's almost old-fashioned to say that, because it has been 20 or 30 years all the economists just say we have to have a plain carbon tax for everybody, but it is still a very important recommendation for all policymakers, probably with compensation policies for vulnerable peoples, etc. But it is still very important to say that to everybody.
Jose Miguel, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to add two other things which are for this financial dimension could be very interesting, and I'm sorry to use in the Chilean case, which I know better than compared to the other ones. The other thing that we have done is the following. We just make a call for different projects as like a demonstration project. We use green hydrogen in different stages: production of green hydrogen, production of ammonia, using this in terms of e-fuels, etc. We as a Corfo, which is we are like the agency related with the production promotion. We set on the table, you put on the table a subsidy of $50 million. Under the two conditions. The first one, that this plant will be a demonstration to everyone that this can be done, which is mainly a technical feasibility that can be done. Okay? And the second one is that this kind of mechanism in terms of the subsidy will only be given at the end of the time, not at the start. So the conditions for these plants have to be running by December 2025. And once they're running, they will get the public money. So they give incentives in terms of the evaluation of the project is fine, but the money will be given at the end, not at the start. This is one thing which probably is an interesting case that we have promoted. And and we already have 6 projects underway in a different mechanism, as already said. The second one, which I want to raise, is important issue for a small country, which is mainly related and oriented to the exports, because part of us already said of the production of green hydrogen that will become ammonia or a few other subproducts will be, in the case of Chile, exported. Okay, and you have one very interesting institution in the world, which is the World Trade Organization. And the World Trade Organization, part of the job they do, if they're not dumping among countries. So if you have a massive subsidy to the supply side in certain countries, like say USA or a few other ones related with production of energy, especially green hydrogen, you suppose that not even single molecule can be exported for those countries, okay? Because you're in a certain way doing a dumping effect. And this is very relevant for countries like us, because we want to compete in the world market, fairly. But if countries, you can do this kind of subsidies for local domestic consumption, which is fine, and this will go targeting the decarbonization worldwide, which is fine as well. But also you have to think in small countries like Chile that have a very competitive advantage in production of green energy that will not only be consumed at the local, but also internationally, mostly internationally. So this dimension for us in terms of financial issues as well is very relevant, because we don't want to have this kind of unfair competition in the final markets coming from these countries. So I want to raise these two other questions, maybe will help for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Jose Miguel. And maybe just to give also to rebound on this international perspective, Paul, maybe you can give us some insights on the geographical dimensions at stake when it comes to R&D and deployment and financing.
Sure, thanks, Bertil. Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned already, to achieve a transition of the energy sectors as compatible with the Paris Agreement, we need to deploy worldwide the low emissions technologies, not only in advanced economies. And so in our analysis, we assess that the global energy investment need to reach around $4 trillion by 2030, which means that in terms of investment, for $1 of investment in fossil fuel, $7 should be invested in clean energy technologies by 2030. And this massive amount of money needs to be spent in emerging market and developing economies for 60% of it. And looking forward, this share, this imbalance increases, which means that there is a real issue, or at least an important point that Mercedes mentioned already about international collaboration, because what we are currently seeing is that the demonstration projects, the lab scale work mostly occur in advanced economies, in China as well. So we also have, as Jose Miguel mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act that will, we think, will really help trigger a lot of deployment for CCUS and green hydrogen and hydrogen in general production. But most of the future production capacity will occur in emerging countries. So as mentioned already, India, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa. So what we see is that if there is not the international playing field level to enable this international collaboration, we would postpone and we would miss our targets, milestones, both in 2030 and by 2050. And just to add on the chicken and egg problem that Renaud highlighted, this is also something that we see in the low emissions in material production. For instance, what policy framework that we are promoting is not only subsidizing the first low emission production plant, but also having some pool policies to create markets through green steel procurement, for instance, for every project that is paid by the government, whether national or subnational. You can define a specific share of green steel, green cement, green material to be incorporated within the project. If it's, for instance, to build a bridge or houses, buildings, etc. And a final point on that is the fact that we also see after 2040, and we have made an assessment by 2050, that if enough financing is provided now, the low emission technologies, so for the case of steel and cement, can become cost competitive. Of course, with the carbon price at around 150 dollars per ton. But that's what we anticipate in the net zero emission by 2050 scenario by 2040. We see that the technologies can be cost competitive against the conventional technologies. So the transition phase will require some public subsidies, and you have a leverage effect where you would also have private capital coming in the project. But then once the development is and the series of plants are built, then you can be competitive on a really market basis.
Thank you, Paul. I think we are close to the end of this panel, but maybe if WebEx participants want to drop some questions in the chat, please feel free to ask us some questions. Maybe we can answer quickly one or two of them. Maybe I'm asking you to type a bit too quickly because there is only 5 minutes left on our clock. So I think we can close the panel now. I don't see any question coming, so I think it was an impressive overview of all the questions that can be asked around these new emerging technologies and how we can manage to bring them at scale as quickly as possible, because we see they are really key to ensure that we have a real and smooth transition to a low carbon economy. So I really want to thank all of our panelists for their involvement in that session, their presentations, their very informative answers to all the questions. So a big thank you to you all. This brings us to the end of the first day of the Green Swan conference. The conference is going to resume tomorrow at 2 p.m. CET. So I really hope that many of you learned a lot also today, and we'll connect back tomorrow. So thank you all again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.